We have been in a series called The Wonder of Emotions since the beginning of this year. And we've looked at many different emotions: joy, depression, courage, just to name 2 or 3. And I have actually been anticipating this particular topic relating to anger now for many weeks, even months. Have been reading and studying and listening and viewing. But I'll make a little confession here at the beginning. I've been just a little angry this week because I was not scheduled to speak. Pastor Ryan Hodgins was scheduled to speak today, and he was going to present a message on a different emotion other than anger. Tuesday morning, Pastor Ryan texts me, "I have nausea and abdominal pain." And so I very appropriately and politely texted back and said, "Ryan, I'm sorry you're feeling as you are. I'm a little concerned for someone in your overall health and age that you would be experiencing this." And, next line, "I'm just looking at the weekend and what the implications may or may not be for me." Okay, we'll touch base on Wednesday morning. And we did, and he said, "Not a whole lot better. Still have nausea and still have abdominal pain." And I said, "Okay, well, let's give it till tomorrow and see what you're feeling like tomorrow." Now, we set the preaching schedules months in advance, and I had especially scheduled myself out for right now, because my wife, Sharon, teaches in the public school system, and she's on spring break all this week. And we actually had plans to possibly head to Myrtle Beach, but we looked at the weather and, when you have the option of going to Myrtle Beach and it's only 3 hours away, you don't have to go. It's not like you live 10 hours away and you're going to go regardless. You have the option to go or not go. It's not really the best beach temperature and beach weather. But we have plenty to do around the house. In fact, I was going to actually take Thursday and Friday entirely off. But Thursday at 12 o'clock, we made a decision. "Bryan, you're preaching." So what had been planned for a week from today went into turbocharge mode in order to be prepared at the moment. So I will confess, just a little, I'm not with Pastor Ryan. It's called situational anger. Situational anger. No one plans on purpose to get, "I think I'm going to go ahead and get a stomach virus, so Pastor Bryan has to speak for me." No, that's the furthest thing. That's not even in the orbit of the moon. So, as the saying goes, it is what it will be. And actually, at one point, I had been thinking that this would be a 2-part, 2-presentation subject because it's huge. It is huge, and it is complex. So let's just jump right in to a Bible story, all right? 2 Kings chapter 5, Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. Now the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife, And then she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy." There's a lot of questions that come to our consciousness as we look at this story and this conversation. A girl? Was she 10? Was she 12? Was she 14? She's been captured in a raid by a neighboring enemy nation. She's been taken out of her home, taken away from her parents. And yet, she offers the services of Elisha, the prophet, without consulting him. Amazing. Naaman went in and told his master, the king, saying, "Well, thus and thus this girl said to us from the land of Israel." The king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So preparations are made. Naaman departs, and he takes with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothing, and he makes his way to Israel, and he brings the letter to the king of Israel. Now be advised, the story continues on, when this letter comes to you, that I have sent Naaman, my servant, to you, that you may heal him of his leprosy. This story is so interesting because nothing is announced ahead of time. So the king of Israel replies to that, "Well, am I a god to kill and make alive that this man sends a man to me to heal him of his leprosy? Oh, he just seeks a quarrel with me." Now, how much time passes, how long Naaman is hanging out in the courts of the king of Israel, I don't know, but somehow Elisha picks up on what is happening. "Why have you torn your clothes, O king? Please, let him come to me, and he shall know there is a prophet in Israel. You may not think too much of my ministry, king of Israel, but Naaman and the king of Syria will." So they punch into their phones the GPS for Elisha's residence. Naaman went with his horses and chariot, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." Really? But at this, Naaman became furious and went away, saying, "Indeed, I said to myself, he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of his God and wave his hand over the place and heal me of my leprosy." So he turned away and went away in rage. "Indeed, I said to myself, surely this man will come out and call upon the name of his God." Naaman's anger was triggered by expectations that he had. "I said to myself." His anger was triggered because he felt devalued. The prophet didn't even come out and greet me. What happens when the pastor doesn't greet me? I have expectations as to whether or not this is going to be a friendly. Is the pastor going to be friendly or not? He felt humiliated. I'm a person of importance. I'm a person of distinction. I've already lost control in my life, but now I'm losing more control. You're beginning to see and think about the triggers of anger in your life, aren't you? Anger arises most frequently and most significantly in those circles in which we are present most often. And that would be in our family, and it would be in our work arena, and it would be in our church arena, wouldn't it? And I suppose in your neighborhood, if you're fairly well connected to your neighbors. The work arena. I've talked to some of you. Some of you have talked to me about the frustrations and the challenges that you experience in your work arena. And there are days where you feel like saying, you can take this job and shove it. And some do. And then they go home to their spouse and they say, I had it up to here today with my boss, and I told him to take this job and shove it. Do you have another job lined up? No. That was actually a country song, wasn't it, back in the 70s? So if he played that backwards, would he get his job back as well as his pickup and his beer? I don't know. So those arenas of anger take place most often with the people that we associate with on a regular basis and who are really important to us. But we all know that anger can be triggered on the highway. Oh, yes, road rage. And just a word of advice, let it go. Just let it go. My older brother is a chaplain in Fort Worth, Texas. He told me of an experience he had. Case came into the ED, gunshot wound as a result of road rage. Driver number 1 ticked off driver number 2. Driver number 1 did not know that driver number 2 had a gun. Hey, it's Texas. You must assume that everybody has a gun in Texas. The danger of Naaman's anger is that he almost forfeited his healing. We didn't look at this part of the story in detail, but one of his staff, when maybe the emotion had subsided just a little bit, kind of had the guts to say to Naaman, well, Naaman, what do you have to lose? Why don't you just go ahead and do what the prophet instructed you to do? You got nothing to lose. And you know the story. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7! And my skin is clean. Oh yes, there's danger in anger. And for Naaman himself, personally, he almost forfeited his healing. But anger goes beyond that. Genesis chapter 4, Abel was a keeper of the sheep, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. And the Creator engages Cain in a conversation. Why are you angry, Cain? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. This is the very first indication that we have in recorded human history in the biblical record that God was recommending an anger management class. but he didn't go to class, and he didn't rule over it. Now Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against his brother and killed him. So this is why Jesus connects the dots in his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. You have heard that it was said of old, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment." And so anger leads to things like domestic abuse and a whole host of other things, because the anger gets out of control. The Creator said, "Cain, you should rule over it." The danger of anger. The danger of anger. But there's a flip side. In the Bible, we read of Jesus, according to Mark chapter 3, that he entered the synagogue again. Very inconsequential word. But I'm so happy to see that many of you are entering the synagogue again, rather than staying home and watching it online. Yes, I'm looking at you right in the camera right now. You could enter the synagogue again and be with God's people in person on Sabbath. I heard a little faint response out there. You could actually be in person with God's people on Sabbath morning. Oh, yes. Okay, we had a chorus there. And a man was there who had a withered hand, so they watched him closely whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Step forward." And then he said to them, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But, like good, conservative Protestants, they kept silent. This was not a charismatic congregation. They just kept silent. For reasons other than what I just implied. And then the Bible tells us in Mark chapter 3, "And when he had looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other." That's the opportunity of anger. And we'll explore that more next week. But in a sense, anger is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. It becomes good or bad in the context and for the motivations that it is expressed and to the degree that it is expressed. And in this one instance, we have anger as an opportunity, and we also have anger as an intent to destroy, because the response of those present in leadership, the Pharisees went out and immediately plotted with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. Oh yes, the danger and opportunity of anger. Now, I know that this is somewhat unnecessary, but what is anger? From an academic perspective, it is an intense emotional state involving a strong, uncomfortable, and non-cooperative response to a perceived provocation, hurt, or threat. Let's make that a little bit more concise. It is a charged emotional response of protective preservation. Let's get it even a little bit more simple. It is that feeling, right? And it manifests itself physically with an increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure. It triggers a fight or flight response. There's facial expressions. There's body language. There's physical aggression. We've already seen that in Cain killing his brother Abel. Anger was physically demonstrated in Jesus' experience when he went into the temple, and with a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and poured the changers' money and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." Jesus let it rip. But he was in control. Our anger, according to the Creator, is controllable. And it can be expressed for danger or for opportunity. Cain, you should rule over. We can control our anger. And here's a scenario that I think some of you will identify with. It's Sabbath morning. You're at home. You are preparing to leave and come to the worship service, and something goes awry. It could be that the kids are dilly-dallying around, getting dressed. It could be that someone puts something on the stove to kind of get pre-cooked or mid-cooked or whatever cooked you're going to do with it. And for whatever reason, you are delayed. And someone becomes the reason for the delay. So you have a conversation in the car en route to church, and you have feelings that are up to here. You don't even want to see each other. And you walk in together as a family. Going, "Happy Sabbath." Happy Sabbath. Or if you were in another faith community, someone might ask you how you're doing, and you would say, "I'm blessed and highly favored, filled with the Holy Ghost I am." And it was anything but. So we do have the opportunity to control anger. Okay, I rolled through a stop sign not too long ago in the neighborhood at a breathtaking speed of about 3 miles an hour. I was en route taking Alexander to his gymnastics class. Off to the left is a cul-de-sac. So I get around the corner and I look in my rearview mirror. No sound, just lights, you know. I go, "Oh man." I knew exactly. He was hanging out in the cul-de-sac waiting for someone like me to just kind of pause and roll around the corner. Now that was not a highly anger-producing situation for me. I knew. And when he came to the window, I just immediately said, I know. I rolled around the corner through the stop sign. And fortunately, I only got a written warning. So I was grateful for that. But when you come to a legal setting with people who are there perhaps on a charge of domestic violence, which is indicative that their anger is out of control, they often will be dressed very nice in court, and they will very politely address the court. So we have the capabilities of controlling anger. The Bible says you yourselves are to put off all these: anger, wrath, and malice. Now, I would interject here that in some cases, with those who have sustained a head injury, an internal brain injury, there may be contexts of angers and triggers of anger that are more powerful than for those of us who have not had a head injury. And we need to be mindful of that. And if there is any potential of linking a pattern of anger to some prior physical injury, that should be explored, because that can be pursued. But the Bible repeatedly counsels that we, even in our fallen, sinful condition, have the capacity to control anger. In James chapter 1, the apostle writes there, James, the brother of Jesus actually, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." And in the context of that encouragement, he writes just a few sentences later, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger," he qualifies that, "human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." So you know what triggers your anger, but you may not know what triggers somebody else's anger. And maybe something triggers your anger that you're not fully cognizant of. So here's a few anger triggers. Someone cut you off in line. Someone misunderstood what you said. Someone ignored your feelings. A relationship breaks up. You feel trapped, smothered, and controlled. You feel like a failure. Someone broke your trust. You were abused. You were lied to. You had to wait in a very long checkout line. Your kids are not obeying you. The waitress is very slow and brought the wrong food. Your spouse forgot to call and he or she is late. Your spouse has been unfaithful. Some of these are more significant than others, obviously. Your kids relentlessly demand your time. You forgot to do something that you were supposed to do. You were responsible for this. You don't have time for yourself. You're so engaged and so giving to others and so overtaxed. You don't even have time for yourself. Someone said something harsh and insensitive. Your boss does not appreciate you. The driver in front of you is going very, very, very slow. And that's a trigger for me. Like, come on, guy, if you're not going to drive this, get in the right lane, will you please? You can get angry at God because somebody close to you died. So how do we process that? How do we manifest that? How do we go about life? Chip Ingram, along with a counselor, Dr. Becca Johnson, offers these faces or masks of anger. We shut down. We assert power and authority. We become pushy and aggressive. We yell, scream, shout, slam, belittle, demand, slander, intimidate others. We become depressed. We isolate ourselves. We alienate others. We repress. We become fearful. We hit. We grab. We beat. We throw. We threaten. We become hostile. We manipulate others. We experience self-hatred and try to cover up our feelings, pretending that we're not really angry. We rationalize. We blame. You made me do this. We become discouraged, despondent. We minimize. We deny our feelings. We become critical. We become sarcastic. We give ultimatums and we sneer. You identify with any of those? And yet, we hear the Creator's word to Cain. You should rule over it. You should rule over it. So in the time that remains, we're going to be focusing on this again next week. We're just going to look at the first step to ruling over it. And that is acknowledge. Acknowledge. Admit. I have some form of anger. I have default manners in which I process or deal with or don't process anger. Going back to that same resource, Chip Ingram and Dr. Becca Johnson, they have identified 3 categorical masks or faces with anger: spewers, stuffers, and leakers. And you can already kind of guess where this is going. Spewers are an exploding time bomb, or they are a calculated time bomb. And the extreme of this would be seen in that employee that nobody had any idea about comes into the workplace and begins to shoot people. That is a calculated time bomb. Sometimes it's spontaneous. Just a person just erupts seemingly out of nowhere. In the spewer's thinking, anger is necessary. Do what I say or else. As they express their anger in a spewing manner, they have a sense of power and control. So Chip Ingram and Becca Johnson have accessed the work of a couple of others: Les Carter and Frank Minerath, who have also done a lot of work in anger. So here are 10 questions that we can ask ourselves. Am I a spewer? Now, those who are closest to you already know. And we can so clearly and quickly see the anger manifestations in other people, but oftentimes we can't see it in ourselves. So here's 10 questions. I can be blunt and forceful when someone does something to frustrate me. As I speak, my voice becomes increasingly louder. When someone confronts me about a problem, I am ready right now to offer a rebuttal. No one has to guess my opinion. I am known for having unwavering viewpoints. And when something goes wrong, I focus so sharply on fixing the problem, I often overlook people's problems. I have a history of getting caught in bickering matches with my family members. Okay, there's a person in my family arena who has been engaged in conflict with me, and engaged in conflict with this one, and engaged in conflict with that one, and the common individual is so easily seen by us. During verbal disagreements, I tend to repeat myself. Just in case they didn't get it the first time or the 4th time, I'm going to tell them the 8th time. I find it hard to keep my thoughts to myself when I know something is wrong. I have a reputation of being strong-willed. And then finally, am I a spewer? I tend to give others advice even when it's not asked for. I've been on the receiving of that at times. You probably have too. Or maybe you're the one that gives advice when it's not asked for. But I just stand there and I go, I really didn't request this. And so I'm getting angry in a different manner while they're manifesting their power up mode. When we think of the Bible, who would be a spewer in the Bible? Who would be a spewer in the Bible? Saul comes to my mind. He spewed at his son Jonathan 1 Samuel chapter 20, Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman." Now, we have a vernacular for that today that I'm not going to articulate, but I think most of you have heard it. The interesting thing is that, hey, Dad, didn't you have something to do with that as well? Were you not involved also? But Jonathan did not reply in that manner. "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established." See, he had expectations. Those expectations were not going to be realized. "Now send someone to bring him David, for he must die." Remember the 10 questions. If you registered with only 5 of them, you would have the potential to be a default spewer. You don't have to qualify with all 10. Just 5. What about the stuffer? Stuffers repress, they deny and avoid, they suppress. They pretend in stuff because for them, anger is bad. They fear rejection. In their thinking, anger is sinful. They fear making a fool of themselves, so I'm not going to say anything. I fear retaliation. Here are 10 questions. Are you a stuffer? I am very image conscious. I don't like to let others know my problems. Even when I feel frustrated, I portray myself publicly as having it all together. And the church is such a breeding ground for this. I'm not implying that we should kind of, okay, I'll use the word, vomit on people, emotionally. I'm not implying that we should emotionally vomit on other people. But if we want to be healthier, there should be somebody in the church. In fact, on occasion, I've had people ask me in the lobby, "Well, so Pastor, how's it going? How was your week?" And if it's someone that I have history with, and they catch me off guard, I will give them a 5-minute report that they really were not anticipating. And then I'll say, "You just got more than you asked for, didn't you?" But I have a history with them that I felt safe enough to actually be a human being instead of instead of being the pastor. Because pastors are human. But I have learned this, that many people in the church, if you're really honest and transparent, you'd rather your pastor was not human and above it all. You may not have articulated that to yourself, but if you know the pastor is having challenges, it puts you on a little bit of dis-ease. You're a little bit off balance. You're a little bit uncomfortable because it doesn't seem all right. Am I a stuffer? I am rather reserved about sharing my problems or frustrations. Number 4, if a family member or friend upsets me, I can let days pass without mentioning it. Number 5, I have a tendency to be depressed and moody. Number 6, am I a stuffer? Resentful thinking is common for me, although many would never suspect it because I put on that facade. I have suffered with physical ailments, headaches, stomach ailments, sleep irregularity. Number 8, there are times I wonder if my opinions and preferences are really valid. Number 9, sometimes I feel paralyzed when confronted by an unwanted situation. And 10, I feel guilty a lot about little things, especially if someone is upset with me. Are you a stuffer? Some of you are thinking to yourself, oh my word, I'm a spewer and a stuffer. Because in certain arenas I can spew, in other arenas I will stuff. Who's a stuffer in Scripture? Abigail. 1 Samuel chapter 25. If you don't know the story of Abigail, I'll try to succinctly summarize it for you as we read through the text. 1 Samuel chapter 25. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you now. Hear what your servant has to say. Please, pay no attention, my lord, that wicked man Nabal." And who is that wicked man Nabal? It's her husband. He's just like his name. His name means folly, and folly goes with him. Now here's the backstory of this conversation that Abigail's having with David. David and his men are still kind of fugitives. They're vagabonds. They've been out in the wilderness, and for a period of time now, they have been watching over Nabal's flocks from a distance. The shepherds are taking care of them, but they've kind of been an extra ring of security for Nabal's flocks. Nabal is a rich guy. He's actually a rich fool. His name means fool. And so David sends a message to Nabal saying, hey, this is what we've been doing. We've been benefiting you for a month now. Could you share with us some provisions, like some meat and bread and raisin cakes? Nabal sends a message back to David and says, who is David? There are so many vagabonds out here these days. I'm not going to send you anything. And David is white hot with anger. Abigail hears about all this. She gathers some servants together and brings provisions to David, and then has that conversation that we just read. Abigail is a stuffer because she has to be a stuffer. She's married to a jerk. I don't know if she was angry with her parents for setting that up, or do you remember Dr. Laura Schlesinger, radio host from about 20 years ago? She wrote a book, 10 Stupid Things That Women Do to Mess Up Their Lives. And later on, she came out with a companion book, 10 Stupid Things That Men Do to Mess Up Their Lives. You remember those books? Before your time there, young man. In his mercy and grace to Abigail, the Lord signed off on Nabal's last heartbeat. And he died not too long after that. And David was so impressed with the diplomacy of Abigail that he asked her to become his wife. But are you a stuffer? I'm a stuffer. I'm a stuffer. Because I'm not allowed to be a spewer in this arena. In this arena. Now, I'm a spewer as well, and we won't go into the details at the moment. Spewing is less and less, but I'm a stuffer because I have to be a stuffer. The moment I would spew in a church setting, I'm done. Lost all credibility. All credibility. And I will be vulnerable enough with you to say that church is a significant source of anger for me. I remember on one occasion, not in this congregational setting, but in a prior one many, many years ago, I had an elders meeting on a Sunday morning, and we were talking about some very substantive things, like our beliefs. And in this particular congregation, there was an element present that had become disenchanted with Seventh-day Adventist some basic Seventh-day Adventist beliefs. And I was advocating that we needed to emphasize these things in our community. And a couple of elders that gave me pushback. And I was so angry. I went home that Sunday noon, and I went out and ran uphill for about 5 miles at a nature preserve. And that is one of the most therapeutic things for me to do when I am challenged with anger, is to physically engage, because there is a physical component to it. And when you have all of that adrenaline and that go out and run it out, spit it out, lift it out, get some mechanism where you're not damaging other people. The third mask or category of anger, leakers. Leakers are passive aggressive. They're similar to stuffers, but it will leak out in a context other than its source to punish the offender. And this is characterized by sarcasm, negativity, procrastination, critical attitudes, and a withdrawing. So here are 10 questions. Are you maybe a leaker? When I'm frustrated, I become silent, knowing it bothers other people. I'm just not going to respond. They can guess what I'm thinking, but I'm not going to engage. I am prone to sulk and pout. When I don't want to do a project, I will procrastinate. I can be lazy. When someone asks me if I'm frustrated, I will lie and say, no, everything's fine. I'm cool. You cool? I'm cool, yeah. There are times when I am deliberately evasive to others so they will not bother me. 6, I sometimes approach work projects half-heartedly. 7, when someone talks to me about my problems, I stare straight ahead, being deliberately obstinate. You're over here, you're talking to me, I'm not even going to give you eye contact. I'm just going to look straight ahead. I am often sarcastic and hide my real hurts behind jokes. I withdraw affection and become frigid when hurt. I conveniently forget to do things for people who have wounded me. Are you a leaker? Actually, depending on the situation, the context, I can be all three. Not simultaneously, but in different modes, in different arenas, at different times. Who is a leaker in the Bible? Who's a leaker? Moses. Hear now, you rebels! Must we bring water for you out of this rock? You see, actually Moses is a combination leaker-spewer. He had been stuffing, going to God, saying, God, I can't do this anymore. Just let me die. These people are a pain in the neck. Why did you ever engage me at the burning bush? I'd rather go to herding sheep. I don't want to do this anymore. And one day, he had had it. And it cost him. It cost him big time. He could not realize the earthly objective for which God had called him of finally bringing the children of Israel into the promised land. It should have been 11 days, according to Deuteronomy chapter 1. And Moses was not responsible for those 10 lousy, unfaithful, fearful spies. That was not his deal. He had suffered with them for 38, 39 more years after that. And he blows it this one day because he leaked. Godly people who've walked with the Lord a long, long time can have very significant anger issues. I think the Apostle Paul was also a leaker. When he was on trial with the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, he started his response to his trial saying, "Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day." And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. And then Paul said to him, "God will strike you, you whitewashed wall." Didn't know that was in the Bible, did you? "For you sit to judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the law?" And then Paul was rebuked again and said, "Are you going to speak to the high priest that way?" And Paul says, "Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, I didn't know he was the high priest." I think he did. But that's just reading between the lines. You should rule over it. And the first step to ruling over it is to acknowledge it, to admit it. And maybe this message will actually segue into a conversation that you might have. Oh, let's wait till after lunch, okay? But maybe it'll segue into a conversation that you might have in your family. Maybe it'll segue into a conversation that you might have in your work arena. Maybe it'll segue into a conversation that you might have in the church family. The dangers and opportunities of anger. Jesus loves people who are challenged with anger. He knows what we are struggling with. In fact, he chose 2 hotheads to be among his 12. James and John, whom Jesus, ironically enough, nicknamed the Sons of Thunder. Jesus gave them that nickname. Hey, James, you short fuse guy. Hey, John, you who like to fly off the handle. Come, follow me. I will make you fishers of men. And their anger management was a work in process. Mid-ministry, in Luke chapter 9, a Samaritan village refuses to host Jesus for an evening. And when Jesus and the disciples get this message, James and John, their default response is, "Well, do you want us to command fire and come down from heaven and consume them?" Oh, they had been very well nicknamed. James didn't really have the opportunity to live out God's work in his life because he was beheaded early on. But his brother, John, did. And in some of his final writings, his first letter, John chapter 4, we read this: "Beloved, let us love one another. For love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God. The dangers and opportunity of anger. I want to rule over it. And I think that the Holy Spirit is encouraging you and inviting you to rule over it also with the Lord's help.